Becky and this is my partner Dan, and we're here today to talk a bit about dating and relationships with a disability. We've been together for nearly a year now and we're going to be sharing some of our experiences with you today. But first, Dan's going to tell you a little bit about himself and his condition.
I was diagnosed with a life-changing neurological condition called Friedreich's Ataxia in late 2009. My childhood and early teens were quite normal. I liked doing all the normal things that boys our age do. So I loved climbing trees in the park, skateboarding, playing football with my friends. When I was 15, I started noticing changes. I couldn't stand my skateboard and I was tripping over a lot when I was playing football, and I couldn't carry a drink between rooms without spinning off of it. At the time, me and my parents would put it down to me being a gangly teenager, and then eventually I grew out of it. One day, I started an apprenticeship when I was about 18. They involved climbing telegraph poles. I was climbing a ladder in front of one of my coaches at the time, and he said that my feet weren't locating properly on the rungs of the ladder, and that I looked very unstable and unsafe. And he suggested I go and see a doctor. So when I saw my GP, and that kicked off like nearly 2 years of diagnostic tests, blood tests, MRIs, and a lumbar puncture. Eventually, I was given the diagnosis of Friedreich's Ataxia. Ataxia is a condition that affects balance, coordination, and speech. It can be a symptom of other conditions like MS, but there are, and brain injuries as well, but there are over 100 different types. I was diagnosed with Friedreich's, which is the most common. It is a rare degenerative condition, which means it gradually takes away movements that you take for granted. At the moment, there are limited treatments and no cure, which is where Ataxia UK come in. Ataxia UK are a fantastic charity that provide help and support for those affected by the condition, as well as fundraising for research into treatments and ultimately a cure. Dating can be tough for most people, but even more so for people with disability. Before I got in the chair, I was on and off dating for about 2 years. But as the ataxia progressed, I became more self-conscious, and I was embarrassed and nervous about meeting new people because I looked drunk when I was walking a lot of the time. So I gave up on dating for a little while. When I got into the chair, it took a while to get used to it, but it did take away some of the worries about going out and meeting new people. So when I was comfortable, I decided to put myself out there again. I signed up to usual apps and websites and went on a fair few unsuccessful dates. Eventually I signed up to an app called Bumble, which is where I met Becky.
When I met Dan, I'd been single for about 7 months. My previous relationship really wasn't very good. I was really enjoying being single and finding my feet again. I've got 4 horses, a dog and a cat, and I have plenty of things keeping me busy. So I really wasn't looking to get into a relationship or get into anything serious. After a few months and a few other dates, I came across Dan's profile on Bumble. There was pictures of him in his wheelchair on there, but I didn't really have a chance to have any preconceptions because he'd written a very to-the-point bio. It said that he has his own place, a car, a job, so he has his independence and he wasn't looking for a carer, and also that it works. So I could tell from that he had a sense of humour. He was really honest and upfront, so obviously I found all that appealing. I'm quite matter of fact about things too, try not to take myself too seriously. So I thought there was real potential for us to get on quite well. So I was pleased when we matched. We started chatting, just the usual stuff like our interests, what we got up to, where we were from and things like that. And then we exchanged numbers, and after a few days Dan sent me a message saying, do you want to ask me anything about the wheelchair situation before you fall in love with me? So cocky, bit of a cheeky and a risky line, but I said yes. I didn't want to know any details about the disability because it wasn't going to affect my ability to fall in love if I was going to fall in love with him. So that's when Dan briefly told me a little bit about FA. He didn't go into detail, just told me a little bit about the condition and his symptoms and how it affects him on a daily basis. After about a week of chatting, quite early on, we went on our first date, which was really good. We planned to just go for a drink and a look round at the Icon Art Gallery in Birmingham, which we did, and after that we were really enjoying each other's company, so we decided to go for a drink. And that wasn't enough, so we ended up going for dinner together as well that evening. And despite me making it very clear to Dan from the beginning that I wasn't looking for anything serious and I wouldn't be getting into a relationship, we were living together after just 3 months.
In October last year, I found myself flying headfirst through a quarry in Wales at over 100 miles an hour. This was during our first week away together to Snowdonia, where we saw some incredible scenery and stayed in a lovely little cottage at the base of the mountain. A highlight of that trip was our visit to Zip World, which is the longest and fastest zip line in Europe and does a mile in 50 seconds. I don't think I could have done this if I wasn't with Becky. Not only for the moral sport, though she seemed more scared than me at the time, but also for the logistics. She was there to help me into the harness and the hard hat and all the equipment that I needed. And the start of the zip line was at the top of the mountain, so we need to get into a truck to get to the top. Unfortunately, she couldn't do it herself at the time because of her own health issues, but she was there to help me through everything that I needed to get to the top. Being with a partner who knows me so well and knows when and when I don't need help is priceless. Becky gives me the confidence to go out and try new things, and she makes me feel less anxious about the challenging situations. Together, there isn't much we can't overcome.
So I could pick some of the more obvious highlights from the last year with Dan. Like he said, our trip to Snowdonia, the gigs that we've been to, our weekends away in Chester and London. But for me, the everyday stuff is just as wonderful. From the very start, we've sort of defied what people thought we could do and been on a lot of interesting and cool dates. We still regularly go out on date nights, we go to the pub, do pub quiz. We're always out exploring with the dog in the park and going through the woodlands. We're pretty much always busy and on the go. When the weather's nice, Dan will come and see my horses with me, and we love spending time outdoors. We do a lot of things that people might assume somebody in a wheelchair either couldn't or just wouldn't do.
We'd be lying if we came here today and told you that it was always easy. I've always tried to be as independent as possible. And I'm sure if you ask my parents, they'll say I wasn't very good at taking help for anyone. So when Becky moved in, I found it hard to let her do things for me. Little things that I find frustrating, like doing up buttons on a shirt or clipping my nails. Like, they're not things that I like asking for help with, but they just make life that little bit more easy. I sometimes struggle with the feeling that I'm holding back. Although our trip to Snowdonia was mostly great, there was one particular low point. We were going to see a waterfall and it was up a slight hill, and Becky had researched the route and it was meant to be wheelchair accessible. But the problem was it'd been wet for a few days leading up to that, so the surface of the path was quite loose. I've got an electric attachment for my wheelchair, and it usually copes quite well with situations like that. But the ground was just too loose, and I couldn't get any traction, so I couldn't get to where it needed to be to see the waterfall. And I was just left feeling a bit low, just feeling that if Becky was with an able-bodied person, she probably would have been able to see that waterfall. The trips and falls are painful physically and emotionally. From time to time, I do lose my balance and fall over. As a lot of people with ataxia do, I sometimes stand up and I use a stroller to walk around the flat, so when I fall over, that's like the situation I'm in. Every time hurts, but it's harder with Beth around because it just makes me think about the future of the condition, and worry about how she's feeling.
The most difficult thing for me over the last 12 months since meeting Dan was dealing with some of the reactions that my friends and family had when they found out about him. So after a few weeks and some really great dates, we clicked straight away, and I was starting to feel quite excited about things with him. So naturally I wanted to share my experiences with people close to me, tell them about this man I'd met and the dates we'd been on and things like that. But I unexpectedly had some pretty frosty and deflating reactions when people found out that Dan's in a wheelchair. My mum especially told me that she was worried that I'd miss out on things, that our dates wouldn't be very fun, that I'd feel restricted or held back, and that I wouldn't be able to do all the things that I wanted to do because of Dan. And it only got worse when they found out that FA is degenerative. My mum wouldn't engage in any conversation with me about Dan. Whenever I tried to tell her about a date we'd been on or how I was starting to feel about him, she just changed the subject, and she was just really standoffish about it. And that was really frustrating for me and really hard because she hadn't met him, none of my family or friends had met him, they weren't in a position to judge him, and I knew how I felt, and it was really annoying not being able to share my excitement with the people close to me. Eventually, people realised that nothing they said was going to change my mind, and I don't know why it took them ages to realise that because I'm pretty stubborn. So we were having a really good time together, and I just told people that I'd rather have a limited amount of time with somebody that's absolutely perfect for me and genuinely be happy and be having fun than to have a lifetime with the wrong person and always be wondering what if. So the only thing I struggle with now sometimes is the emotional effects that FA has on us. So people thought that the bits that would be difficult for me would be the things I have to help Dan with and the practicalities and logistics of his disability. The day-to-day things like that aren't a problem for us at all, but the things that are difficult is seeing him get frustrated or angry when he can't do something and knowing that there's nothing I can do to make it better. Seeing him fall over and things, obviously that's hard, and I don't think it ever will get any easier. But it's just part and parcel of our situation, and the good outweighs all of that immeasurably.
So what have I learned about dating with a disability? My first tip would be to be confident. It sounds obvious, but I think it's even more important for someone with disability to be comfortable with their situation and confident about who they are before they put themselves out there. It's easier said than done, believe me, I know. My second tip would be to be open and honest from the start. When I first put my profile on apps and sites, I didn't use pictures clearly showing me in the wheelchair, and I wouldn't bring ataxia up until much later on in conversation. It can be tempting to try and hide a disability from a potential partner online, but I found that when I did start putting pictures of me clearly in the wheelchair and telling people about ataxia straight away, although it did reduce the amount of matches I got felt like it did limit time wasters and left only people who were genuinely interested. My final tip would be, when you do get that first date, make sure you pick a location, somewhere that you know well. The last thing you need when you're already anxious and nervous about meeting someone new is to be worried about the accessibility of a venue.
So, as I'm sure everyone here knows all too well, disabilities and chronic conditions can make dating and relationships a bit complicated and pretty tough at times. Dan told me that before we met he was considering applying to go on the Undateables. Obviously I think he's anything but undateable, but a recent Scope survey showed that 2/3 of people feel awkward around those with a disability, with some of those people feeling so awkward that they just avoid disabled people altogether. So given that, I can see why Dan was worried that he'd never meet the right person. I'm really determined to break down some of those barriers in society and answer questions that people might have about disabilities, specifically about dating and relationships with a disability. We're really determined to encourage other people to push their boundaries a bit, step outside their comfort zone and put themselves out there and try new things like we're both doing together. Dan had depression and anxiety after his diagnosis, understandably, and we want to provide something that would have helped him when he was in that situation. So there are a few of the reasons why I've started a blog called Head Over Wheels. We talk a lot on there about dating, accessibility, sharing some of our stories and experiences in the hope that it's going to raise awareness of disability, specifically ataxia, and just provide some positivity and encourage other people.
If you'd like to find out anything more about Ataxia, go visit the stands on the guys on the stand. And if you would like to follow our story, we've got some cards here with our social media details on. Thank you all for coming today, and we'd like to answer any questions you might have. Anyone?
That's fine. Thank you all for coming.